Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. American's Moments in Geography. Today we're going to continue looking at Western Europe, and in particular, we're going to start talking about what are referred to as the Nordic nations. And we're going to kickstart things here off with Norway. So we're going to look, today we're going to be able to identify and explain the physical geography, the cultural geography, and then we'll also certainly get into just an overall dive into more of the cultures of the Nordic nations. But let's kick things off with Norway. So Norway is often referred to as the land of the midnight sun, which refers, of course, to as you get closer to the Arctic Circle, there are time periods of longer sun. And about a third of Norway is above the Arctic Circle, and this would certainly be dealing with extremely cold conditions. And again, typically you see more mild climates as you get further south, and that's where most of Norway's about roughly 4.6 to 5 million people live. One of the things that's also certainly something that you will see if you get the opportunity to go to Norway, or certainly look at pictures of Norway, are the fjords, which are these tall, steep-sided valleys that are kind of inlets of the sea. And so you can kind of see salt water flowing through here. Certainly adds to the beauty of Norway. And certainly throughout a lot of Norwegian history, those fjords provided sheltered harbors and also just beautiful scenery for people to live in. Norway is actually a pretty wealthy nation, and a lot of its economy and its economic stability and wealth is due to the oil and the natural gas reserves that you will see in the North Sea. And so a lot of, which would be located here on our map, a lot of that, of course, adds to the wealth of the people of Norway. It's also certainly fishing is a major economic activity here too. And it should be noted that Norway is not a member of the EU, but does have extremely close economic ties to the EU, and certainly has been a partner there. We have a parliamentary democracy with a ceremonial monarchy, so there is still a king and queen, but again, purely ceremonial, so in some ways could resemble a constitutional monarchy. But again, it's more of a parliamentary democracy when we look at it. And our capital city is Oslo. And again, you can see here some of the more traditional Norwegian dress, and you can certainly see the European ancestry here in the physical characteristics of the Norwegian people. Next, we'll move on to Sweden. Sweden is also wealthy because of its abundant, so its great large number of natural resources, including things like iron ore as well as the pine forests. And so when we look at the economics of Sweden, Sweden's exports, so what they're selling to other countries, they're going to include things like machinery, automobiles, perhaps you've heard of companies like Volvo, paper, wood, electronics as well, certainly. Whether it's in Stockholm or other Swedish cities. Highly efficient farming practices that more than provide enough food for about the 9 million people, so larger population than its neighbor Norway. It has also adopted more socialist ideas, and this is something that you'll see in some of the other Nordic nations as well. But it's probably best noted here in Sweden. And so Swedes pay a higher taxation rate, and in exchange for that, that provides more of a safety net for people who become sick. So people can go to the hospital and they're not going to get a bill when they come back or when they leave. It's there to help the needy, perhaps people who are homeless and of other needs. It helps the elderly. And those who are already retired by providing them more with a safety net and pension to help pay for their needs moving forward, and of course, people who have lost their jobs. Unlike Norway, Sweden is a member of the EU, so of course they've adopted the euro. They are a constitutional monarchy. There is still certainly that tradition of the king and queen, and the palace for the king and queen and princes and princesses is in Stockholm, which is also the capital and the largest city in Sweden. Looking a little bit further to the east in Finland, Finland can claim to be home of the largest, what we would call unspoiled wilderness in Europe. So that's referring to land that hasn't been affected by human activity, and in some cases has never had people living in it. The economy here is very dependent upon forestry, and so products like paper and wood products. There's also certainly heavy industry, so making like machinery and other like construction equipment, certainly a part of this. And then of course electronic communications. Companies like Nokia have their home in either Helsinki or in other cities in Finland. The first people settled in Finland came from Siberia, and so because of that influence, Finland is kind of a combination of that Nordic tradition and even some Russian tradition. And so their culture and their history are a little different when it comes to Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Iceland because of that connection to their first peoples and certainly to their proximity to Russia. Helsinki is the capital and largest city in this country, right around about 5.5 million. All right. Next in our Nordic nations is Denmark. And the Danes certainly find themselves physically located on the Jutland Peninsula. So referring to this space here in Europe. Denmark also has semi-autonomous, Greenland is semi-autonomous. It holds its own government, but it is still under the rule and still a part of the nation of Denmark, which again kind of reflects one of the things that you'll see in all these Nordic nations is that Viking tradition, but certainly Greenland being a part of that. When you look at Denmark, some of the richest farmland in all of Europe is located here. And so it makes sense that some of the big things that exports that come out of it are food products. So butter and cheese and bacon and ham and other products. It's also, of course, known for its fine porcelain, and perhaps at some point in your childhood you played with Legos. They make their way from Denmark. Population's here about 5.5 million, give or take. It is also a parliamentary democracy, and Copenhagen is the capital. It's also the largest of all the Nordic cities. So regardless of Oslo or Stockholm, Helsinki, or even Reykjavik in Iceland, it is the largest of the Nordic nations and of all Nordic cities. It's also got a very distinct famous landmark, Hans Christian Andersen, who was well known for his kind of fantasy books. There is a statue commemorating him of the Little Mermaid, which is, of course, one of the things, and certainly Disney has made that, of course, quite famous through its film. I want to wrap up today by talking about Iceland. Iceland, when it comes to physical geography, is extremely interesting and unique. It is this island in the northwest of Europe, and it's home to geysers and hot springs and glaciers. There's just so much unique physical geography in such a small area that Iceland's kind of, for people who like those different kind of landscapes, you can see it all in a kind of this smaller space and easier to travel through. Icelanders definitely utilize geothermal energy to heat their homes and buildings and even sometimes their pools, and certainly using those hot springs as part of that. And the economy is very dependent on fishing. They also have introduced more manufacturing and more service industry in connection now to more tourism. Tourism has definitely impacted the economy, whether it's going to see the natural wonders, going to see like whale watching in Iceland has increasingly become more and of course wanting to get if you're wanting to get a European experience and you live in, say, Canada or the United States, this is, one of the shorter flights, and so a lot of people take advantage of that. There's about 300,000 people living in Iceland, and they tend to be very separated. It's harder to get, in public transportation is harder to come by because of how spread out the cities are in Iceland. And so about 90% live in urban areas, so it's a very urban population. Agriculture is a little bit more challenging because of the physical geography, but certainly not impossible. And Reykjavik is your capital, and certainly your largest city in Iceland. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up this edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Check out the check-in quiz and answer the questions. But again, Nordic nations, a lot of interesting history here. Certainly some interesting connections and different policies, whether it's, like the welfare state in Sweden or the kind of unique culture and untapped or undisturbed wilderness of Finland, to just the overall, uniqueness of these nations. So, for my students, make sure you've been following along with the guided notes. If you've got any questions, please ask. For those of you who are just listening, hopefully you've gained a little bit more understanding of the gems that are the Nordic nations in Western Europe. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.